The desert highway stretched for miles, a narrow strip of asphalt threading through a vast sea of moonlit sand. It was past midnight, and the only sounds were the faint whisper of wind and the hum of distant cicadas. Talia Monroe drove alone, her hands steady on the steering wheel of a silver hybrid sedan. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, flicked between the road ahead and the glowing dashboard. A faint jazz melody drifted from the speakers, barely louder than her breath. She was returning from a two-day conference on cybercrime in Phoenix, but her mind was already back in D.C., reviewing case files, analyzing behavioral patterns. That's how she worked, always planning 3 moves ahead. But even she couldn't predict what was waiting under the veil of quiet night. A sudden flare of red and blue exploded in her rearview mirror. Talia's jaw tensed, her fingers tightening just slightly around the wheel. "Of course," she murmured. She signaled and pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, rolling to a full stop beneath a flickering street lamp. The music clicked off. Her fingers moved automatically, hazard lights on, window halfway down, ID and registration ready. She placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Every movement rehearsed. Controlled. The approaching footsteps crunched loudly against the gravel, echoing in the stillness. A flashlight beam cut through the side mirror, bouncing around the interior before settling on her face. She didn't flinch. A sharp knock on the window followed. License and registration. No greeting. No explanation. Just an order. Talia turned, meeting the eyes of the officer. Mid-30s. Clean-shaven. Tall, broad shoulders. His badge read Officer L. Hayes. His posture screamed ego. His eyes, however, carried something colder, entitlement. She handed him her documents through the window without a word. As his fingers touched hers, he gripped them just a fraction too tightly. A subtle flex of power. She didn't react. His gaze darted to her license. A pause. "Is this your vehicle?" he asked, voice clipped. Talia didn't blink. "Yes, officer." "You in a hurry?" "No, officer." "You know you were speeding?" She had not been. The cruise control had been set 5 below the limit. Still, she didn't argue. Her voice remained calm. "I wasn't aware." Hayes narrowed his eyes, searching for anything: nervousness, defiance, fear. Talia gave him nothing. "Step out of the car." Her pulse quickened. Not from fear, but from the burden of knowing how this game was played. She exhaled through her nose and slowly unbuckled her seatbelt. When she opened the door, the dry night air hit her skin like ice. She stood tall, hands visible, eyes focused. He gestured toward the front of the car. "Hands on the hood." She complied. His hand hovered near his holster. For who? There was no one else around. No crowd. No threat. Just her. "You carrying any weapons?" "No." "You mind if I check?" A classic trap. Decline, and you're uncooperative. Consent, and you're complicit in the violation. "You have the authority to proceed," she said coolly. He moved in. Not with professionalism, but with purpose, the kind that came from years of believing no one would challenge him. His hands patted her down, shoulders, ribs, legs. Finding nothing, he grunted in disappointment. Another squad car pulled up. Unnecessary backup. A second officer stepped out. Younger, uncertain. Following orders. "You're being detained for suspicion of obstruction and resisting questioning," Hayes said suddenly, pulling out his handcuffs. Talia turned her head slightly. "Resisting? You refuse to comply with a lawful order." There it was. The lie. She didn't resist as he locked the cuffs around her wrists. She didn't protest as he guided her to the back of his patrol car. Not because she couldn't. Because she understood something Officer Hayes didn't: some games are best played in silence. Before slamming the door, he leaned close. His breath reeked of coffee and smugness. "You people always think you're so clever," he said, chuckling under his breath. "But you're all the same in the end." Talia smiled. Just a tiny curl of her lips. It was enough. His expression faltered for a split second before the door closed. Inside the car, she sat perfectly still, staring out at the empty stretch of desert road. She wasn't thinking about the charges. She wasn't worried about jail. She was thinking about timing. About how long it would take for this man to realize what he had just done. Not tonight. Not yet. But soon. The courtroom was cold, not from the air conditioning, but from the tone it set. Its walls were dressed in faux mahogany and the faint scent of bleach clung to the floor. This wasn't justice, it was theater. And like all good theater, everyone had their role to play. Talia Monroe sat quietly at the defense table, wrists free now, but not without phantom weight. Her blouse was crisp, her hair neat, her back straight. She had slept little, not from anxiety, but from anticipation. She knew this system. She'd worked within it for years. But now, she was on the other side of it. Judge Conrad M. Kinlan sat at the bench. Older, silver hair slicked back, skin pale and thin like parchment. He wore his robe like a coronation cloak, believing himself the keeper of law, order, and some divine authority passed down by old men in marble buildings. His eyes skimmed the room like he was scanning a menu, already tired before the day had begun. "Let's proceed," Kinlan muttered with a sigh. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Jeremy Nash, stood up. Late 40s, designer suit, teeth white enough to light a runway. His confidence oozed from every syllable. Talia had seen men like him before, flashy, practiced, dangerous not because of what they said, but how they said it. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, addressing the 7 women and 5 men seated to the right. "Today, we are here because a routine traffic stop turned into a display of hostility. Officer Hayes, a veteran of the force, encountered what should have been a simple exchange. Instead, he was met with suspicion, disrespect, and non-compliance." Talia's face remained unreadable. She let the words wash over her. Nash continued, painting her as combative, uncooperative, a woman who refused lawful orders. He was a master at tone, never shouting, never accusing, just guiding. Guiding the jury into a narrative. A familiar one. One they'd heard before. She did not follow instructions. She argued. She created a scene, Nash said. And so, Officer Hayes, following his training, detained her for obstruction. A juror, a man in his 50s, nodded slightly. Talia caught it. Nash gave a final polished smile and returned to his seat. The judge nodded without enthusiasm. "Call your first witness." Officer Logan Hayes took the stand with the same smug air he'd worn the night of the arrest. His uniform pressed, his belt gleaming. The courtroom lights caught the metal of his badge just right, as if it too wanted to testify. "Officer Hayes," Nash began, "can you walk us through the events of that night?" Hayes nodded. "Absolutely. I was patrolling Route 97 when I observed the defendant speeding. I initiated a stop. When I approached the vehicle, she was immediately aggressive. Questioning my authority. Refusing to provide documents at first. When I asked her to step out, she hesitated. Her tone and posture were confrontational. For my safety, I detained her. It was a performance. Flawless, but hollow. And Talia had heard better liars in interrogation rooms." Nash paced a little for effect. "Did she threaten you?" "Verbally, she was trying to provoke. She didn't follow my instructions. That was enough of a red flag." "And did you find any weapons?" "No, but you don't wait for that discovery. If someone is escalating, you take control early." "Control? That word again. A courtroom synonym for domination." Talia's defense attorney, Ellis Grant, stood. Young, earnest, with a slightly rumpled suit that betrayed his nerves. He adjusted his tie and approached. "Officer Hayes," he said, his tone even, "you stated Ms. Monroe refused to comply. Do you have any footage of that interaction?" Hayes blinked. "Body cam was malfunctioning that night. We filed a report about it." "Dash cam?" "There was no dash cam from my cruiser active either. The backup vehicle arrived later." Grant nodded, as if unsurprised. "So, to clarify, there is no visual or audio evidence, no dash cam, no body cam, that supports your version of events?" Hayes' jaw tightened. "That's correct." "Interesting." The word hung in the air, soft but sharp. "No further questions," Grant said, returning to his table. The judge barely looked up. "Next." Talia stood. Calmly. Silently. The jury watched her rise, not because she moved quickly or forcefully, but because there was a sense of purpose in her steps. Like she didn't walk to the stand, she claimed it. She raised her hand, took the oath, and sat. Grant stood beside her. "Ms. Monroe," he began, "please describe the events of that night in your own words." "I was driving home," she said clearly. "I was not speeding. When I was pulled over, I followed protocol, hazards on, hands on the wheel, documents ready. I did not raise my voice. I asked why I was being stopped. That's when Officer Hayes escalated." "What do you mean by escalate?" "Without cause, he asked me to step out. I complied. He frisked me. Found nothing. Then he detained me without stating a clear reason. Claimed I was obstructing." Grant nodded. "And during this interaction, did you ever resist?" "No." "Raise your voice?" "No." "Threaten?" "No." "Did you argue?" "I asked one question, why was I being stopped?" Talia looked at the jury, her voice firm. "That was my crime." Grant stepped back. "No further questions." Nash returned. "Ms. Monroe," he said, his tone faux genteel, "what do you do for a living?" "I work in data systems." "Tech support?" "No. National cybersecurity protocols. Federal level." A flicker of interest passed through a juror's face. "Interesting," Nash said. "So you're trained in intelligence?" She didn't answer. He stepped closer. "Do you have experience manipulating narratives?" Grant rose. "Objection. Sustained." Nash returned to his table, unsatisfied. The judge shifted. "Very well. We'll recess until tomorrow morning." As Talia stepped down from the stand, she looked at Hayes. His smugness remained, but his fingers tapped the table nervously. She passed by without a word. Back at the defense table, Grant leaned toward her. "They believe him," he whispered. "At least some of them." Talia gave him a small nod. "They won't for long." The courtroom was already humming with a low, expectant energy when Talia arrived the next morning. Word had spread, among journalists, legal interns, and quiet observers who sensed something simmering beneath the surface. People didn't know the full story yet, but instinct told them the case wasn't what it seemed. Talia walked through the courthouse's glass doors dressed in a sharp charcoal blazer, her eyes shaded by dark sunglasses. She moved without hesitation, her posture giving nothing away. Not arrogance. Not fear. Just control. Inside, Assistant District Attorney Nash shuffled through a fresh stack of notes. His performance the day before had landed, but not with the resonance he had expected. He'd caught glimpses of the jury's faces, conflicted, unsettled. That woman's presence, the way she spoke, the way she didn't react, was getting under their skin. And under his. On the other side of the aisle, Ellis Grant sipped stale coffee, eyes fixed on his client. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked. Talia nodded once. "It's time." Judge Kinlan entered through the side door, robe swaying behind him. He barely glanced at the room before settling into his seat. Court is now in session. The morning passed with testimony from the second officer, the one who had arrived as backup. He claimed he saw Talia tense during the stop, and heard her questioning the officer's authority. Grant cross-examined him calmly, exposing that the backup officer had only been on the scene for less than 2 minutes before the arrest. His words wobbled under pressure, but Nash quickly redirected. Then came the pivotal moment. "Defense may call its next witness," the judge announced, half distracted. Ellis stood. "Your Honor, we call Ms. Talia Monroe back to the stand." Whispers stirred in the gallery. The jury's attention sharpened. Talia walked to the stand again. But this time, there was a noticeable shift in the air. No longer just a calm defendant, she held the room's attention like a magnet. Grant approached. "Ms. Monroe," he said, "yesterday you described the night you were pulled over. Since then, have you had a chance to review any external evidence regarding that night?" "Yes," Talia said evenly. "Can you explain?" "My attorney was able to retrieve a civilian recording, video taken by a bystander parked across the street. It captured most of the stop." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Even Judge Kinlan raised an eyebrow. "Objection," Nash said quickly. "There's no prior submission of this footage." "We received the footage last night," Grant responded. "We're requesting it be admitted as new evidence." "Objection stands," Nash snapped. "Chain of custody is unclear." Judge Kinlan sighed, rubbing his temples. "Let's see what you've got, counselor." Ellis approached the AV cart, inserted a flash drive, and queued up the footage. The lights dimmed slightly, and the screen flickered to life. The grainy video appeared, illuminated by the street lamp overhead. The sound of tires on gravel. Officer Hayes approaching the vehicle. No aggression. No yelling. Just Talia asking, calmly, "Why was I pulled over?" Then came the moment Hayes claimed she had resisted. The footage showed her stepping out of the car slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. She placed her palms on the hood, complied with the search, and said nothing. There was no aggression. No escalation, at least not from her. The jury watched intently. When the video ended, silence hung thick and heavy. Judge Kinlan cleared his throat. "We'll allow the footage to be entered. The jury may consider it." Grant didn't smile, didn't gloat. He returned to the stand. "Talia, is the video consistent with your recollection?" "Yes." "Did you resist?" "No." Nash stood abruptly. "Your Honor, I request a recess to validate the video's authenticity." "Overruled," the judge replied without missing a beat. He had seen it, too, the flaw in the narrative. Ellis turned back to the jury. "Ms. Monroe, what was going through your mind that night as you stood beside your car, Being frisked without cause. Talia exhaled slowly. I was doing math. Math? Yes. I was calculating how calm I needed to be to stay alive. How slow my movements had to be. How little I could say without being seen as aggressive. I've done that math my whole life. The words settled like lead. Ms. Monroe. Grant paused, his voice softening. Earlier, when asked about your profession, you said you worked in cybersecurity at the federal level. Could you clarify that for the court? Nash stirred. Objection, relevance. Overruled, Judge Kinlan said, his tone unusually curious. Talia's eyes flicked toward Nash, then back to the jury. I'm a federal agent, she said clearly. Special Investigations Unit. I work under the Department of Federal Intelligence. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Judge Kinlan straightened. Agent? Monroe, she confirmed. I've worked undercover, counter-terror operations, and led task forces on digital threat networks. My job requires me to assess threats, and de-escalate them. That night, I wasn't treated like a person. I was treated like a threat. Nash stood, visibly flustered. This information should have been disclosed. She was under no obligation to disclose her employer in the initial arrest, Grant cut in. Especially when her rights were already being violated. The judge raised his hand. Enough. Sit down. The room felt frozen. The badge she pulled from her pocket glinted under the overhead lights as she held it up, not with pride, but with resolve. I didn't reveal it before, Talia said quietly, because I wanted you to see me the way Officer Hayes saw me. As a woman. As a citizen. As a stranger. Nothing more. And you judged me. You judged me without knowing who I am, what I've done, or what I stand for. Her voice remained even. But her words hit like thunder. Nash tried to recover. This doesn't change the facts of the arrest. You're right, she replied. It only changes how uncomfortable the truth feels. She stepped down. And for the first time since the trial began, Officer Hayes looked shaken. Talia passed him on her way back to her seat, paused, and asked without turning her head, "Still sure about your testimony?" He said nothing. But the silence was enough. The courtroom was no longer just a room. It was a pressure chamber. The silence left behind by Talia Monroe's quiet declaration of her true identity hadn't faded, not really. It hung in the air like static electricity, ready to spark again with the slightest friction. Even Judge Kinlan's gavel seemed hesitant, striking the bench with less conviction than usual. The noise it made didn't carry authority. It sounded like retreat. The jurors returned from their short recess with changed eyes. Before, they were curious. Some skeptical. Others apathetic. But now, every glance at Talia held the kind of awareness that comes only when someone realizes they've misjudged everything. At the prosecution table, Assistant District Attorney Nash was rattled. He masked it well, tightened tie, squared shoulders, deliberate pacing, but his mind was unraveling beneath the surface. This wasn't supposed to happen. The defendant wasn't supposed to be a federal agent. The case wasn't supposed to come with video proof. And Officer Hayes? Hayes was supposed to be their rock. Instead, he'd become a liability. Your Honor, Nash said suddenly, trying to wrestle back control, the prosecution would like to call Officer Hayes back to the stand for follow-up testimony. The judge nodded, trying not to show his relief at the return to familiar ground. Officer Hayes rose slowly, as if his uniform weighed more than it did the day before. His jaw was clenched. His eyes kept darting, toward the jury, toward Talia, toward Nash, toward nowhere. He took the oath again and sat down, clearing his throat twice before Nash even began. Officer Hayes, Nash started, I understand the new evidence may seem damaging at first glance. Can you explain your actions the night of the stop, now with the full context of your recollection? Hayes nodded stiffly. Yes, sir. I was assessing the situation as it unfolded. When I approached the vehicle, I saw behavior that I interpreted as potentially hostile. The driver was calculating. That word again. Calculating how? Nash asked, coaching him forward. She didn't make sudden movements, but she was watching me. Intently. She had this presence. I felt something was off. My instinct told me to stay on alert. In your professional opinion, were you justified in detaining her? Hayes hesitated. Just half a second. Yes, he said finally, but even the single syllable came out tight. Grant stood immediately. Permission to cross, Your Honor? Judge Kinlan gave a slight nod, wary of what might follow. Grant approached the stand, calm but deliberate. Officer Hayes, thank you for returning to the stand. I want to walk through something specific, your original arrest report. May I? Go ahead, Hayes replied, trying to keep his voice level. Grant held up a paper. This is your written report from the night of the arrest. In it, you wrote that Ms. Monroe was verbally combative but made no physical threats. Is that accurate? Hayes nodded. But in your testimony yesterday, you stated she resisted, that she escalated, and that her behavior justified detention for obstruction. Which account is the truth? Hayes opened his mouth, then closed it. Grant pressed. Let me rephrase. Did you amend your description of the event to justify the arrest once you knew it would be challenged? No. You didn't alter your testimony to fit a narrative? No. Yet we have video footage showing complete compliance. We have a report stating no aggression. And we have sworn testimony from a federal agent that contradicts your claims. Are all of those wrong? I acted on instinct. Instinct isn't fact, Officer Hayes, Grant replied coldly. The jury leaned forward, collectively drawn to the tension. Grant continued. You're trained to de-escalate, correct? Yes. So tell me, how does an unarmed woman with no visible threat indicators, who followed your commands precisely, present a danger that required cuffs and detention? She looked too calm. The courtroom froze. One of the jurors blinked, stunned. Another scribbled something in her notepad, lips pressed into a thin line. Too calm? Grant repeated. Hayes stammered, realizing what he'd just admitted. So she wasn't angry. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't resisting. She was simply calm. And that alarmed you? Hayes looked at Nash, as if hoping he'd intervene. But Nash's poker face had slipped. His mouth was slightly open, realizing the damage was done. I thought she was hiding something, Hayes said weakly. Like what? Intelligence? Self-control? A badge? Grant said, voice rising just slightly. Or was it the fact that she didn't flinch when you flexed your authority? Objection. Nash barked. Withdrawn, Grant said smoothly, then turned back to the jury. No further questions. Hayes stepped down, but he didn't walk the way he had when the trial began. There was no longer pride in his gait, only weight, like he was sinking into his shoes. Nash tried to recover in closing statements, returning to his familiar lines. This case isn't about badges or resumes, he said. It's about accountability. Ms. Monroe questioned a lawful stop. She complicated a simple process. That is the root of the issue. But his words were hollow now. Even he could hear the weakness behind them. When it was Grant's turn, he stood in silence for a moment, letting the jury sit with everything they'd heard. When power meets truth, he began, only one survives. He gestured toward the empty witness stand. You saw the truth. You heard the lie. And more importantly, you saw who flinched first. He turned to Talia, then back to the jury. This case is not about a traffic stop. It's about whether we accept lies simply because they wear uniforms, and whether a person's calmness under pressure should be mistaken for guilt. He paused, locking eyes with the older man in the front row of the jury. Talia Monroe did not escalate that night. But make no mistake, she stood her ground. And today, so can you. He sat down. The courtroom held its breath. Judge Kinlan cleared his throat. The jury will now retire to deliberate. Talia leaned back in her chair, feeling every eye in the room on her. She didn't look at Hayes. She didn't look at Nash. She didn't need to. They had all seen what mattered. And for the first time in the trial, the silence belonged to her. The jury room door closed with a soft but final click, leaving behind a courtroom teeming with suppressed tension. Talia Monroe sat motionless, her fingers laced calmly on the defense table, but inside, her mind was sharp as ever. She wasn't calculating escape plans or outcomes, she was observing reactions. Assistant District Attorney Nash avoided her gaze, now sitting stiffly, hands folded but twitching slightly every few seconds. He'd lost the room, and he knew it. Even Judge Kinlan, normally a model of courtroom control, looked older, heavier, like the weight of the trial had added years to his face. The murmurs in the gallery behind her had turned into a low hum. Activists, reporters, students, everyone here was watching not just for a legal outcome, but for a reckoning. And reckoning rarely left clean lines. Marcus, her younger brother and only family member in attendance, leaned close to her. They'll see it, he whispered. They have to. Talia didn't respond. Not out of doubt, but out of discipline. She had seen too many outcomes go sideways even when all the evidence was stacked on the side of truth. Truth was never the end. Sometimes it wasn't even part of the verdict. The door opened. The courtroom stood as the jurors re-entered. Their faces were neutral, unreadable. But that, in itself, was an answer. People who came back from a deliberation they doubted, they wore it. These faces were carrying conviction. The forewoman, a composed woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked hair, handed a folded slip of paper to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Quinlan. He adjusted his glasses, unfolded it, and stared at the words longer than necessary. His lips pressed together. Then he looked at the jury. In the matter of the state versus Talia Monroe on the charge of resisting arrest, how do you find the defendant? The forewoman cleared her throat. Not guilty. A breath Talia didn't realize she had been holding slowly escaped her chest. She didn't move, didn't celebrate. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, and listened to the echo that followed. Gasps. A few sighs. Mutters of disbelief. But no one erupted. No one could. It was too definitive. Judge Quinlan tapped his gavel. This court acknowledges the jury's decision. The defendant is free to go. His words were tight. Bitter. As if they'd been squeezed through clenched teeth. He had lost, too, but he wouldn't dare admit it. Talia rose slowly. Marcus stood beside her, tears threatening the corners of his eyes. "We did it," he whispered. "No," she said quietly. "We survived it." "That's not the same." She turned, gathering her things. The gallery behind her parted like a tide, making space as she walked toward the courthouse exit. Then the media wall hit. Flashbulbs popped like fireworks. Reporters surged forward, microphones outstretched, voices overlapping in a frenzy. "Agent Monroe, what message does this verdict send to law enforcement? Do you believe Officer Hayes will face charges? Do you think your case exposes deeper systemic failure?" Talia stopped, just for a moment, the courthouse doors behind her now open to a cloudy afternoon sky. She turned slowly, eyes scanning the crowd. "I think," she said, voice clear and level, "that one verdict does not dismantle a system. But it shows the cracks." Another question flew in. "Will you return to your federal position after this?" A pause. She met the reporter's eyes directly. "That depends on whether the system I serve is willing to be held accountable like the people it governs." And with that, she walked down the stairs. But as she and Marcus made it to the street, his hand on her shoulder, her phone buzzed. A text. "Unknown number, you played it well. But you've only seen the edge of the board." She stared at the screen. Not surprised. Not afraid. Just aware. "Talia?" Marcus asked. "Something wrong?" She slid the phone into her pocket. "No," she said calmly. "Something expected." They kept walking. Past the courthouse. Past the media circus. Past the shouting voices on both sides of the justice line. Talia knew the truth, this wasn't an ending. This was an initiation. The moment the system realized she wasn't just a name on a docket, she was a force that remembered everything. Days later, Officer Hayes was placed on administrative leave. No formal charges were filed, yet, but the internal affairs inquiry leaked. His name became synonymous with misuse of authority in headlines that once would have glorified him. He disappeared from public view. Aidan Ash's office made no public statement. Judge Quinlan, under pressure from ethics committees and public watchdog groups, announced his early retirement. No interview. No press release. But Talia? She didn't retreat. She was seen now, in spaces that once ignored her. She was asked to speak on policy panels, security roundtables, and even campus lectures. And at each one, she said the same thing. "I'm not an example. I'm a warning." Because Talia Monroe didn't win to be vindicated. She won to expose something. And exposure is the first step toward demolition.